Hello, and thank you for checking out this message from Grace Church San Diego. Put yourself in the crowd, looking at Jesus hanging on the cross. In a single act of amazing sacrifice and love, Jesus spoke words that would flip our world upside down. In this series, we will break down these words, allow them to shape our minds and penetrate our hearts and transform our lives. We'd love to hear how Grace Church is affecting your life. So please send an email to info@gracesd.com with your story. Or if you'd like to help support our ministry financially, you can visit the website below so we can continue to help people find Christ and become His mature followers.
Of all the words that Jesus said, those last 7 sayings that He gave on the cross, as you just saw on that bumper, are some of the most powerful because it changes everything in all these different aspects of life. In the study of the life of Christ, it was so profound in my life when I was in seminary to hear what those 7 sayings meant and to study this with our preaching team and to really get an understanding, all of the noise of life, and then to just hear the heartbeat of Christ in these 7 sayings. Last week we talked about that statement, forgive them for they know not what they do. And then this week, woman, here's your son. And to John, here is your mother. Those are powerful words and they really speak to influence. Influence is important. How many parents do we have here today? Raise your hand if you're a parent. You have the most influence on your kids of anyone else, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But sometimes our families aren't what they should be. That was true of me when I was raising my oldest daughter and second daughter. Carrie was, as a teenager, made some poor decisions. She was raised in a Christian home. We were both Christians. We both loved the Lord, but we were somewhat dysfunctional. We had some areas that kept us from being as close as we should have been. That left somewhat of a void in Carrie's life. And as that void became more and more profound in her teen years, she began to make friends who weren't the best kind of friends. And as she made these friends, they began to influence her. She wanted to be liked. She wanted to be loved. And she was trying to find that in her friendships. And she fell with a group of people that dabbled in drugs. As they began to dabble in drugs, at first she was really powerful at saying no to that, but as time went on, their influence became stronger in her heart. And she began to experiment with some drug abuse or drug use, at first just a little bit. And then as time went on, it got deeper, and her passion for Christ was beginning to be just wrapped up in her drug abuse. She was living a conflicted life. One that says, I love God. But another part of her that said, I just want to be liked. I just want to be a part. I want to fit in. What happens when people develop friendships that are not good, strong character? They're influenced away from the very things that are important to them, and they can be influenced for a lifetime. Fortunately, Carrie's faith came in strong as she got a little bit older, and she was able to say no to those drugs and to recover from that and find the support that she needed. Nothing was more profound than when we moved to another community and there were these college students who all loved the Lord, and all of them were committed to Christ. And they began to influence her, and I saw that influence begin to really give her power in her life. I was so proud of her because she turned back to Christ. Influence is powerful, and I want to talk about those words of Jesus that speak about influence. Welcome to Grace Church. If you're glad to be here, let me hear it. Yeah. Those of you online, we welcome you as well. The last service, my mic went out, and they thought, I got to turn up the volume, Could hear here. You can hear like 3 blocks away. I'm loud. I get it. But anyway, we welcome you here. You might need a Bible. Raise your hand if you need a Bible this morning. We want to share with you out of John chapter 19, these incredible words that Jesus said, woman, here's your son, speaking of John. And you can get to John by going in the New Testament. It's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and then John. John chapter 19, you can find it there. When we speak of families, families are so important. It's a fundamental part of every society. If the family falls, society will go with it. It's important to have strong families. And that takes alignment. It takes alignment with that family. When that family is properly aligned with truth, the kids will oftentimes follow in that. So let me ask you this question. Do you like your family? Well, don't answer it out loud because they might be sitting next to you. That would be a problem. But do you like them? Do they have passion? Is their heart for you? Is your heart for them? Were you rejected growing up? Did you sense that you were in the way of what they wanted to do? Or did they love you profoundly? And, what was your childhood like? That probably affects your life today. It's not an excuse for bad behavior, but it certainly explains some behavior. If you build a house, you have to have a solid foundation, and family is that foundation. I once worked for a framer, and when I worked for this framer, we got this house all framed. It was 2 stories, and we got it all framed. And the owner and the primary contractor came out, and they're looking at the building. The owner is furious. I saw him over there as we're finishing the 2nd floor, putting some doorways in and the headers and so forth. And I can see them debating. And so they did some measurements, and the whole house was out of alignment. And first he blamed my boss, the framer. And then he began to looking at it a little bit more, and he realized that the framing was set on the foundation, and the foundation was not square. It was not solid. And so we had to take all of the framing down and had to redo the foundation. It was a disaster. It's because it wasn't a solid foundation. What foundation did you have growing up? The other day, I had to buy some tires. I got a flat tire, and I took it in. They said, we can fix your tire. But what you probably didn't notice, on the inside of your tires, they're worn very badly, and you need to replace these tires. They said, you got to be kidding me. He said, well, yeah, you've got to replace these tires. They're shot. And he said, by the way, as soon as you get these tires on, I want you to go get an alignment. I went to get an alignment, and it took about 30 minutes, but the guy said, man, your tires, your wheels are out of alignment. And he fixed them. And I said, what's the big deal about alignment? He said, well, not only does it wear out your tires, but it will affect your steering. Didn't you notice? And I said, I don't notice anything when I'm driving. Just ask my wife. She will tell you. She's my watch keeper. She is, okay, eyes back on the road. But I did notice after that, man, it ran so well because it was in alignment. When your life is in alignment, your life comes together. You experience the best of life when you're in alignment. Well, the family, what if it's dysfunctional? It can't help you with that alignment. So let's get into this. In John chapter 19, verse 25, it says, but standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. And the reason I read that is I want you to get the context. We're kind of breaking into the context in John 19, but it's talking about the experience that Jesus was going through and his incredible focus. Notice the next verse. Jesus is on the cross, and he looks down and he saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved. By the way, the disciple whom Jesus loved is John. And also John is writing this. Like, do you ever have one of your siblings say, Mom loves me best? That's kind of what this is, But the reality is John was loved by Jesus. There was a kindred spirit between the two of them that was powerful. John was a faithful disciple. Some of the other disciples were, like Peter, and they were a mess. But John was so faithful and loved Jesus, and Jesus loved him. There was a kindred spirit there. And John got it. Jesus loves me. Man, when you get that idea that Jesus loves you, he has a personal affection for you. And if you don't think so because of your lifestyle, you don't know Jesus, because Jesus loves you even when you blow it. If that weren't true, I would not be standing here today. God is faithful. But anyway, disciple is John. He said to his mother, woman, behold your son, referring to John. And then he says to the disciple, behold your mother. Now, wait a minute. Why did he say that? He goes on, let me finish it. And from that hour, the disciple took her to his own home. So Mary moved in with John, the disciple John, who became the apostle John, who wrote 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, the Gospel of John that we're reading right now. He wrote the book of Revelation, the last book of the Bible. He was a very influential individual, but Mary, she had other children. She had James was one of her sons. She had other sons. I know some churches teach that Mary never had any other children. Just not true. The Bible's very clear. She had other children. Why didn't Jesus think about James or one of the other siblings of his? Because he was concerned about influence, and that's what this is all about. It's very important for us to understand that. So I want to kind of unpack that. Why did Jesus have Mary move in with John? First of all, think about the mental discipline that took when he is being tortured on the cross. He thought about taking responsibility as the oldest son for the welfare of his mother. We know that Joseph had died already, her husband, so she was a widow. And here she is going to be alone. Well, she has other siblings, but were they the right influence in Mary's life? But one other thing before I go on, I notice it says, "Woman, behold your son." Woman? Like, who says that? And I was thinking, that's a pejorative. That's a put down. Like, don't ever, guys, if you're married, don't ever say, "Woman, make me dinner." What are you, Neanderthal? Woman? It sounds like a pejorative. It's just not right. But I looked into this and I realized that woman is actually, in that day, a term of reverence. It was not a pejorative. Because I remember when I was a kid, I was raised by a Marine, and the Marine was yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. He told me that when you speak to a woman, an adult, you call them ma'am. So I took that to heart, and I always call women ma'am. Well, times have changed. I was at Starbucks the other day, and the lady said, "Now, do you want room in this coffee?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am." She got a horrified look on her face. And I'm like, "What's wrong?" And she said, "Do I look like a ma'am? Do I look like a ma'am to you?" I'm like, "I don't know. Is this a gender thing? I don't get it. I don't know. What are we dealing with here? Are you not a woman?" I didn't say that. I was thinking it, I don't want to make a mistake. And I said, "No, ma'am. I mean, yes, ma'am. I mean, yes. You're a woman." And I realized it was a whole age thing, like if you call somebody ma'am, I think they have to be 75 or older now, Like you have to say miss. Like she was like in her mid-50s. I'm not going to call a woman that's middle-aged woman miss. Like that sounds like a pejorative to me. But get it right, guys. Ma'am. Anyway, so that times change. Woman today is not the right language to use, but in Jesus' day, that was actually a term of respect for his mother. And the reality is that Jesus is very concerned about Mary, and I want to show you why. He was concerned about influence in her life. So let me talk about the influence in family, because she had a family. But why not turn to the family? Families have incredible influence. I did a study years ago, and I looked at several surveys, and I tried to find it. I tried to find it the last couple of weeks. I couldn't find it, but it talked about the influence of words from a parent versus the influence of words from others, like teachers, friends, society, whatever. And if I remember right, it was something like this. Every 10 words of influence by the world are overthrown by one word from a parent. In other words, you have incredible influence on your kids because they love you. And so when you speak something, they believe that. Now, that hasn't worked out with my kids, but hopefully it'll work out for yours. They think I'm an idiot. Then when they reach about 25, in some cases 35, they go, "Oh, he got smart all of a sudden," But influence of the family. Just a couple of thoughts on influence. Proverbs 13:20, you don't need to turn there. Whoever walks with wise becomes wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm. So if you're walking with wise people, you're going to be wise. Turn to the person next to you and say, you are wise. Now say, you are a fool. No, don't do that. I mean, think about that. If you're running around with people who are wise, that's going to influence you. There is influence. If you're walking around and doing life with fools, as my daughter was in her teen years, you're going to make foolish decisions. They influence you. It takes a lot of personal integrity and character to be able to combat that influence. Let me show you one more. And this was a very important directive that God gave through Moses. In Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 6, it says, and these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. Let me stop for a second. The words that he's talking about, he had just said this. I want you to understand the most important thing. Jesus said it was the most important part of the law. And it's this. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. And love your neighbor as yourself. Those two things. I want you to take those and I want them to be sown into your heart. I want them to be a part of your being. So these words, love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself, are so important. I want you to put them in your heart. And then verse 7, you shall teach them, mother, father. You shall teach them diligently to your children. And you shall talk of them when you sit in your house and when you walk by the way and when you lie down and when you rise up. In other words, all the time. You're always doing it. You know, the best time to talk to a teenager is when they want to talk. I remember one time I was sitting down with one of my sons and I started talking about it and he goes, you know, can we talk about this some other time? And he said this, he goes, this is not very organic. I'm like, what? He knows who he is. He was right, it wasn't. I was forcing a conversation. Later on, we were able to have a conversation. He still disagreed with me, but it was organic. I was organically wrong. But there's something about those three things that I see are critical to this directive in verse 7. It has to be intentional. You have to think about how you influence your kids. It has to be regular, number 2. You have to do it on a regular basis. Whenever they want to talk, if they want to talk at 2 in the morning, the best thing for you to do is get up and talk to them at 2 o'clock in the morning. That's why I like little kids. They like to sleep at night. So when they want to talk in the middle of the night, we have a strategy. Honey, Kimberly, go talk to them. It works for us. But it not only needs to be intentional and regular, it needs to be truth-based. It needs to be based on this fundamental fact that your life should center about loving God with all of your heart and loving your neighbor as yourself. If you get that, everything else is going to fall in line because you're going to listen and surrender to that very important concept of love. But if you have a dysfunctional family, it may be a problem. Years ago, I read this book, Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion, by Dr. Robert Cialdini. And Dr. Cialdini did an extensive study. He calls it the science of influence. He says these are irrefutable, and he's very strong in his opinion. He said there's only six and only six categories of influence, these key principles. And so I thought we would go through them as quickly as I can. The first one is this. First one is reciprocity, the rule of give and take. When someone gives you something, you feel obligated. Do you ever take somebody else out to lunch and then you buy and then they go like this, hey, I got it next time. And then they never call you again? Probably one of our staff members. That's how that works. You know, you feel obligated to give. In fact, a study was done about this very thing on tipping. And they took several hundred restaurants and maybe thousands of servers. And they got these servers, they said, look, what we want to do. And they provided them with mints. And they said, what we want you to do with the mint, whether you like mints or not, it's irrelevant. And these were wrapped up mints. And when you take the bill to your customer, put a mint for each person at the table on that bill, on that tray. And see what happens to the tips. Do you know something? That tips went across the board up 3%, just by giving that tip. That mint. And so then they decided we want to test it again. And so they said, all right, this time what we want you to do is we want you to put 2 mints for each person at the table. And do you know that tips went up to 14%, not double, but 14%. They tried one more study. In this study, they said, look, what I want you to do is give 1 mint to each person at the table with the bill, walk away, and when you get away, turn around with 1 more mint for every person at the table. And put 1 more mint on the tray and say, you nice people deserve another mint. Tips went up to 23%. That's amazing because people feel obligated to give when they receive. When you and your family, you love your kids day after day and week after week and month after month and year after year, and it's turning out in my life decade after decade, giving. The reality is there's a sense of obligation, and it creates that bond, and it creates influence. The second one that he talked about is consistency, the rule of change. And when we make a commitment to something, it's really commitment and consistency. But when we make a commitment to something, we are consistent with that. When you make a decision about what you believe about something, you really will hold to that and you will be consistent on that. Once we make a contract, especially if it's written, we are much more likely to fulfill that contract. If you come up with a philosophical view, you are more likely, if you write down that view in a paper, a theme, a thesis, or a dissertation, you are more likely to hold to that even for a lifetime. That's commitment and consistency. That's a second key to influence. The third one that he gives is liking. That when we like people, it's the rule of kindred spirit. When we have a kindred spirit with someone, it really impacts us. And the way it works is this, that when we like someone, we want to do things for them, and they have tremendous influence on us. That's why having the right friends is so important. 3 things that make people like you. If you're wondering how you can get people to like you, here it is. If you want me to like you, come to church. I'll like you. We have a rule here. We love you till you leave us. Not true. That's a funny pastor joke. You're not supposed to tell the congregation. Anyway, 3 things that make people like you. Number 1 is we like people who are similar to us. We like people who like the same things as us. We like people that we can relate to. Second thing is we like people that encourage us. When people say, hey, great job, we like that. And it makes us like them, and we have that kindred spirit. And the third thing is we like people who cooperate together with us for a cause or in some common goal. And so when people like us and we like them, that kindred spirit causes tremendous influence. And think about that. When you're in a home where you actually like your parents, you don't just love them, but you like your parents, you like your siblings, there is a much more cohesiveness and it creates influence. The fourth one is this, of authority, the rule of experts. When someone's an expert or even seems to be an expert, we are more influenced by them. Let's think about that for a moment. We have a lot of fitness trainers, in this world today. And the ones that have the greatest influence are the ones who are certified. That helps. But here's the greatest influence. And you can see this oftentimes, people that don't have many clients are people that may be certified, but they're not fit. So somebody walks up to you and says, I'm your fitness trainer, and they're out of shape. You're like, oh, okay, could I get a real one here, please? It's like a guy that needs to go on a diet who's telling you how to diet. You just don't buy it, There's that credibility when someone really believes what they speak to, whether it's a pastor or a professor or a teacher. If they really believe it and they're passionate about it, you have a tendency more to be influenced by it. And so when our families really have a worldview that is centered around truth and based on a foundation of truth, we're much more likely to believe in what they teach. The fifth one is scarcity. And scarcity means it's the rule of survival. When things are not in abundance, like we're running out of a supply of something, it makes everybody want to get it. When something is selling so fast off of the shelves, we want to get one of those. You're too young, most of you, to remember the Cabbage Patch craze. How many remember Cabbage Patch? Oh, you're not as young as you look. I mean, it was crazy. They're going off the shelf. And then they, even Target would say something like, while supplies last. That drives people. We got to get it because if we don't have it, like who cares? But I got to have it because it's running out. 5 hours left. You go on the internet, you're going to buy an item. 5 hours left on this special program. You can get a special deal, and then it will be over forever. You're like, okay, I'll buy it. You buy some stupid item you don't even want. Mary is going to be facing a world of persecution where you can't just go to a worship service like we enjoy here. We can come here. Nobody is going to, mock us, and nobody's going to persecute us. I mean, at least at this point in American history, we have this freedom, and it's an awesome thing. But during that first century, after the death, resurrection, and ascension of Christ is gone, there was tremendous persecution that took place on the church, and they had to go underground to worship. And so it might be in the heart of Mary to say, well, I'll just worship the Lord at home. But she had with her, according to Jesus' directive, the Apostle John, who was he received direct revelation from Christ and could teach her in her home and make her and help her to be strong. And the final one that the doctor shares is social proof, the rule of conformity. When we see society going in a certain way, we believe in it. I had mentioned bell bottoms this morning, and those were so big a deal. Bell bottoms, you couldn't even see somebody's shoes back in the 60s, 70s. And then I said, they're out of style. And then a lady walked up to me, she got bell bottoms out to here. She goes, they're in style now. I go, oh, good to know. She walked away and went, those look stupid. They actually look good on her. They remind me of the 70s. But I guess bell bottoms are in. We just call them boot cut. That's the new way. That's the new bell bottom. Anyway, we were influenced. And I look back on some of those. It looked like a clown. You had these little hip huggers, purple, huge bell bottoms and the tie-dyed shirt. And my hair was down my back. I was just fitting in. I wasn't trying to be a trendsetter. Look at some of you. Would you wear that really if everybody else wasn't wearing it? Look around. Say, why are you wearing that? No, don't do that. We conform. I conform to a certain extent. There are things that keep me from conforming because of my faith. Let me just prove it with one picture. One picture, I'll put it on screen here. I want you to see it. And if you don't agree, think back 70s and 80s. Here it is. I rest my case. Is that a good look? Some of you got the mullet, I'm like, I apologize. This is my senior picture. It's not really. Thank God. But we're influenced by these things. Woman, behold your son. John, behold your mother. These are powerful words. The last few words that Jesus spoke, and he spoke these on the cross. Why is it so important that John and Mary have a relationship where it's domestic, where John is taking care of Mary? Jesus was not ignoring the importance of a biological family. In fact, he was fulfilling that as the oldest son. He was making sure his biological mother was taken care of, but he developed a new paradigm for family. He developed a new family structure, a new form, if you will, of the family. And let me give you a little context to this. Let me just share with you in Mark chapter 3:31. And then I'll start at 31 and 32, and then I'm going to drop back earlier in the chapter. But notice what it says. And his mother and his brothers came And standing outside, they sent to him and called him, and a crowd was sitting around him, and they said to him, your mother and your brother are outside seeking you. Okay, the next verse says, and he answered them, who are my mother and my brothers? He answers his own question. And looking about at those who sat around him, his disciples, he looks around and he says, here are my mother and my brothers. Wait a minute, what are you talking about? Verse 35, for whoever does the will of God, he is my brother and sister and mother. And so the powerful point was Jesus developed a whole new dynamic. He wasn't ignoring his relationship to Mary. He was emphasizing a faith connection with God in the kingdom of God, the household of God, the family of God. If you're a follower of Jesus, guess what? You are my sister or my brother. And whether you like it or not, I'm your brother. And it's a beautiful thing because even if you have a dysfunctional family or a beautiful family, and maybe a family that doesn't have faith, you have a faith family and you are safe here because you are with family. And we're not going to give up on you. We love you because we're family. Jesus made us such. What was Jesus thinking when he said that? Well, if you go back earlier in this passage, so that's verse 33 through 35, but if you drop all the way back into verse 20, notice what it says. And he went home, and the crowd gathered again, so they could not even eat. Verse 21, and when his family heard it, they went out to seize him, for they were saying, he is out of his mind. Now, who's saying he's out of his mind? The crowd or the family? Well, we need to know, to whom does this pronoun they antecede to? Does it antecede back up to the crowd, or does it antecede to the family? Normally, you would just say within that, as close to that sentence as possible. But here's the power of this. The word seize is an important word. When John wrote this, he wrote it in what is called Koine Greek. It was a written language. It was used for the military. It was a powerful language. And in that language, you use the word krateo. And the word krateo for seize does not mean to rescue someone. It actually means to grab them with force. And so I think natural flow of verse 21 is, and when his family heard it, they, the family, went out to seize him, for they, the family, were saying, he's crazy. And you see what happened was when he had come to Capernaum, they began to see that people are seeing Jesus as out of his mind, and they bought into that. And Mary was there. We know that. This is verse 20. We know that from verses 32, 33, and all the way through 35. It was Mary was there, verse 31 says. So Mary is thinking, something's wrong with Jesus. He's off tilt. Now, she knew he was the Son of God, just like you may know he's the Son of God. But then when Jesus asks you to do things that seem unreasonable to you, you go, there's something wrong with Jesus. And so we need influence to say, we're going to follow faith. I'm going to take Jesus at his word. I'm going to believe that he knows best. And so that family of faith becomes more important than just the biological family. I was thinking about the spheres of influence and the different influences on you. Here you are down in the white circle, and the first sphere of influence is society. And society is your educators, your professors, your teachers. It's the government. It's public opinion. Do you remember, maybe you're too young for this, but there was a day that smoking was not only acceptable, it was cool. In 1970, when Apollo 13 ran into its problem, they did a movie about this. And when they had the problem, it goes to depict in 1970 what's going on at Central Command in Houston. And the crazy thing was they were doing all of the calculations longhand, which is crazy. We have computers now that do that. But the most noticeable thing in the pictures of that day, as well as in the movie, everybody's smoking. Everybody's cigarettes and cigars and pipes and, everybody's smoking. If you're not smoking, you're not cool. When I was a kid, smoking was cool. today, if you smoke, you're not cool. I mean, you have to go behind a building to smoke. And this isn't about smoking. I'm just talking about influence. Everything influences us. Society is telling us what to believe and what is right and what is good and what is healthy and all of those things. We're being bombarded by influence. But there's a second level of influence, and that's the family. Family has tremendous power in influencing us, especially when we have intentional and we have regular and we have truth-based communication from our parents. Have tremendous power. But in the case of my daughter, Carrie, who grew up in a somewhat dysfunctional home, even though we loved Jesus, we were messed up. And so our influence was not as good as it should have been. And so the influence of society is where she went. So the influence of the family is important, but it's not everything. But what if you had another sphere of influence, the influence of faith? People around you that are godly men and women who, when you mess up, lovingly and patiently help you move forward. Not by judgment and not by condemnation, but out of real love that says, I know it's going to take time, but I'm here with you to walk with you. That's a powerful thing. That's why I go to church. That, and I get paid to be here. So those two things is why I go to church. Oh, that's funny in my head. So, but we need people of faith in our life. Sometimes that can be dysfunctional. So how do we navigate through all these influences in our life? We need to make sure that the greatest influence is God himself through his word, and that the people that love us well, that they are loving us by sharing God's word with us and encouraging us in our growth. Sometimes we need someone who has special skills to deal with maybe psychological problems or even medical problems. But the reality is it comes down, a real therapist is one who will in my mind, is someone who will free up some of the pathologies so you can hear the voice of God once again. Because if you can hear the voice of God and fall deeply in love with him, you're going to fall in love with other people and your life is going to be right. Sometimes we need help, but these are the influences in our life. So how does this relate to Mary and John? Jesus' last words on the cross were, Mary, mother, look at your son. John, look at your mother. Because none of his siblings were followers of Jesus during his life ministry. They became believers later, many of them. James, we know for sure. But he wanted John to be a godly influence in his mother, because his mother already showed a propensity to believe that there's something wrong with Jesus. And in a society that is saying Jesus is a lie, in that first century, Jesus is a lie, could she have been influenced? I think that the power of this is John the apostle would be this powerful influence in Mary's life. Do you get it? How important it is to have the right people in our lives. And let me just close by talking about becoming a part of the family of God, becoming a child of God. Jesus said, behold your son, son, behold your mother. You can become a part of this family. You can become this new paradigm of a family that's not just your biological family. And I don't mean by that you should abandon your biological family. What I mean by that is you can bring to yourself, through Jesus Christ, a whole new family. And let me show you what I mean. There's myriad of verses on this in the New Testament. Verse 19 of Ephesians 2 says, so then you are no longer strangers and aliens. You aren't outsiders. But you are fellow citizens with the saints and, listen to this, members of the household of God. You become children of God through faith in Jesus Christ. How did you get there? Verse 20 says, it was built on the foundation of the apostles and the prophets who revealed the truth of Jesus. But the truth of Jesus is this, in this final statement I've highlighted for you, Christ Jesus himself being the cornerstone. He's the very cornerstone. You know, we used to have on the building over here on the corner, was built, I don't remember, 1930 or something like that. And it was the second building. This church was started in 1912. I remember well our first service. Anyway, Somebody asked me if I started the church the other day. Okay, no. But anyway, and that building had a cornerstone. They called it the cornerstone. And inside of that plaque that was on the side of the building towards the corner, we actually took it off and we found out there was a time capsule in there. They had some neat things, an old Bible and some cool things in there. It was fun to get that. Deteriorated a little bit because water got in there, but it was cool to get that. Actually, I cried as I opened it because it was just so exciting. They called that the cornerstone, and so many of us think that it's a symbol on a building. But that's not what a cornerstone is, not in the first century. The first century, the way buildings were built, they would take one stone and they would have a perfect cut on that stone, both plumb, up and down, and square at the corner. And they would take that stone and they'd put it as their foundation stone, and all of the other stones aligned with that one stone. That's how they kept it square. That's how they kept it plumb. That's the way they built in those days. And so when Christ Jesus himself is seen as the cornerstone, he is the one by which we all align. Just like your car needs to be aligned, just like your house needs to be aligned, your life needs to be aligned as a child of God through the person of Jesus Christ. Through his death, burial, and resurrection, he set a cornerstone for us to be able to live our lives in a way that is aligned with God. You can have that right now, right where you sit. Would you bow your head?